Good evening, everyone. I'm Courtney Versmo with Generations Health. Thank you so much for joining us for our program, To Travel or Not, 10 Tips for Vacations and Family Trips When You Are Caregiving with Jennifer Fitzpatrick. We are so grateful to have artists sponsoring today's program. And in just a few moments, I'm going to invite them to join us, but first we have a few things to cover. Everyone is muted to eliminate any background noise. However, this is an interactive program, so please feel free to ask any questions, answer any questions, or comment on the discussion that is taking place. To do this, you can utilize the chat feature, or you have the ability to unmute yourself. If you do so, please make sure you mute yourself after. As a reminder, to find the chat, you can scroll over the bottom of your screen and you will see a banner that pops up. On the banner, there is a bubble that says chat. When you click on that, the chat feature will launch and it will most likely show up on the right-hand side of your screen. When you use the chat, your questions, comments, or answers will only be seen by our sponsors, our presenter, and myself. This is simply for your privacy. Again, we encourage your participation, so please use the chat feature. Jennifer is great about keeping an eye on the chat to answer your questions. Please welcome Morgan with Artist.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Generations. My name is Morgan. I'm the Director of Marketing at Artist Senior Living of Lakeview. We are located very close to Wrigley Field. We are an assisted living and memory care community, so if you are ever in the need or you want to come by and take a tour, feel free to reach out and I'll put my information in the chat box. And then I'll take it back over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Okay, let's get started by giving you some information about our presenter today. Jennifer is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, and the upcoming book, Reimagining Customer Service in Healthcare. A former psychotherapist, Jennifer has also been featured in the national media, such as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, Forbes, Fast Company, and many more. When she's not speaking and writing, she can be found serving as a below average first mate on her boat. Please join me in welcoming from Kent Island, Maryland, Jennifer L. Fitzpatrick.
Well, hello, everybody, and let's jump into talking about travel. It's the middle of the summer. We've got a lot of summer still left. And then, of course, once we get into fall, everybody's talking about, do we go away for Thanksgiving? Do we go away for the winter holidays? Do we go on a winter vacation? So hopefully what we talk about this evening is going to help you to make those decisions and how to do it that makes the most sense for you and your loved one that you're taking care of. And feel free, this time is yours. This next hour is all for you. So please don't hesitate to write in your comments, your questions, anything you want to ask. You have this whole time to ask myself and Morgan at Artist, anything that you would like about traveling with somebody you love. And I'm guessing that some of you might be even traveling with somebody who has memory impairment. So those questions are very, very welcome as well. So let's talk about, should we take a trip? Some of you might have decided to sign up for this event knowing that we're going to talk about how to do it, but should you do it? And that's something that I really ask family caregivers a lot, because is it a good idea? And I think we need to really explore that before we get into how to do it so it goes really well. Next part's going to be about preparing, and then finally how to have fun, how to make it safe. So should you take a trip? Once was approached by a family caregiver. I was doing a family caregiver event, and this person was taking care of spouse who had Alzheimer's disease. And I'm guessing some of you might be in that situation, and was telling me all about this safari in Africa that they were going to go on. And I have to tell you, my mouth dropped. They had spent the whole time during the educational session asking questions about how to de-escalate their loved one when they're having hallucinations and delusions, how to deal with their loved one when there's a wandering situation, how to make things a little bit better. And when I heard that they wanted to go on an African safari, I don't think I did a good job of hiding my surprise. And so what I started to ask this person was, do you think that that makes sense? Let's talk about, does that make sense for you? Now, this is a very extreme example. Taking somebody with Alzheimer's disease on an African safari when they're mid-stage is a really big difference than maybe taking a trip a couple of hours away from your home to visit some relatives that maybe live in Michigan, for example. That is a very different proposition. Also, going on a trip on an airplane is a different proposition than maybe going on a trip on a boat or something like that. But it's really important to determine, should you take the trip? First thing in determining that is to think about what your risk tolerance is. So obviously, if you're going on some sort of trip where you have to make reservations, you really want to look at, if you're renting a house or you're getting airline tickets, what is the policy on not going? If something were to happen, maybe you or your loved one became ill, or there was a fall or an accident or something unexpected happened, maybe a COVID diagnosis, what's your risk tolerance? And if you are concerned about that, that you look at, should we look at insurance, or is there a way that I can exchange these tickets, that sort of thing. But I also think it's really important, especially in this time of COVID, to really be thinking about your risk tolerance and as far as health. While there's an uptick in COVID, again, a lot of people are just really scared. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of people that are saying, yeah, I've had COVID once, I've had COVID twice. I'm not really that concerned about it. And everybody has a different attitude about both maybe losing money, but also their health concerns. So I think it's really, really important just to think about that, to talk about that with anybody that's part of the trip, including your loved one, as long as they don't have advanced dementia. If your loved one has advanced dementia, it's probably not going to be productive to have a conversation about that, because he or she won't be able to contribute and be rational about the discussion about what makes sense. But it's really important to think about your risk tolerance and to really examine that and determine what makes sense. But really your risk tolerance, for example, if you get into a car ride and you're going to visit a loved one, maybe that lives a couple of hours away, it's going to be different again than maybe going on an African safari. The reason that I say you want to think about your risk tolerance is because my recommendation to all caregivers, and I'm going to talk about this a couple times during this hour, is if it's not going well, then it probably is time to course correct and change up what you're doing. So let's say that you went on a trip to ones in another state and your plan was to stay a week, and you taken off of work and you get there and your loved one is just not doing well. They're not sleeping well in a foreign house. They maybe are a little bit uncomfortable with all the noise. Maybe there's a lot of kids or a lot of pets, and maybe they're a little bit uncomfortable with some of the noise, and you thought it would go well, but you're finding that it's really not. And I would say to a lot of family caregivers, in some instances, it might make sense to just turn around and go back home and maybe do the trip another time without your loved one. Now, if you don't have very high risk tolerance, that might be intolerable for you. You're saying, nope, I want to go on this trip. We've planned it. I've taken the week off from work. I've gotten everything together, but it's just something for everybody to really be thinking about, because your loved one is, if you're bringing your loved one on any kind of trip, it's going to be tough for them if they have health, mental health, or even cognitive health needs. So the second one is, I want you to think about, why are you going to take the trip? Why do you want to take this trip? Now, some of you might be saying, well, it's a vacation. I want to go on a vacation. I really, really need to relax. Or some of you might be saying, well, I haven't seen my great-grandchildren or my grandchildren or my niece for a couple of months or a year, and I really want to see them. And what I want you to be thinking about is, does it make sense that your older loved one go on this trip if you want to spend quality time, say with a grandchild or with a niece or somebody in your family that you don't see very often? Because if you're going to be doing a lot of care and maybe there's not other people in the friend family network where you're going to visit, would it make sense to do respite, maybe to work with a community like Artists, or to work with maybe home care to get some help, or maybe other friends, family, neighbors can help look after or look in on your loved one while you're on the trip? On the other hand, there's a lot of people that are saying, well, I want to take this trip because I want my mom to meet her great grandchild. She's never met this great grandchild, and the baby's new and mom's 93, and she's already outlived the average lifespan, and we really want them to meet, and let's go ahead and do it. And so those are two really different reasons why somebody might want to take a trip. And so I want you to be thinking about, does it make sense? Is it going to be pleasurable for and meaningful for both you and your loved one to go on this trip? Why do you do the trip? And I think I see a lot of people vacation. It's going to be so relaxing. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go to the mountains. We're going to go to the lake. And they find if they're doing caregiving the entire time, it's maybe not relaxing for them, and it's defeating the purpose of the trip. But also, if their loved one is put in a new environment, it's not relaxing at all for them. So I want you to be thinking about, what's your goal? Why are you taking this trip? Do you need a break? Think about it. Do you need a break from your loved one? And even if it's simply, maybe it's just you're going to go visit somebody in your family, or you're going to visit a friend. Maybe it's just one night. And this might be the perfect time for you to get some time away, to get some respite. I'm curious if anybody wants to write in, if you live with your loved one, feel free to write in if you want to share that, or if you live separately from your loved one that you're caring for. But I know that a lot of people that live in, they find the idea of being away from their loved one just impossible. Like, there's no way that my loved one can be apart from me for even one night. But what we find is that it's really, really good for both of you in a lot of cases for you to travel maybe without that person. Diane Rehm, I don't know if anybody ever listened to NPR, National Public Radio. She was a very famous broadcaster, and she was taking care of her husband who had many, many health issues. And she talked openly about going on a cruise without her husband. And I thought that was really brave, because a lot of family caregivers I feel like they get judged, or they feel, maybe they're not getting judged, but they feel like that they're getting judged, that if they were to go away from their loved one. So if you do need a break from your loved one, and I also want to say that sometimes your loved one needs a break from you. If you're the only face that your mom or your husband is seeing day in and day out, it might do them good for you to go on your trip and them to get some care elsewhere from somebody else. So really be thinking about, do you need a break from your loved one? And again, I just want to throw out, if anybody has comments or questions, if anybody wants to ask anything specific about travel and caregiving, I'm happy to have you put in the chat section. The tip 4 would be consult the doctor. So we're going to assume, all right, we're going to bring the loved one on the trip. We're going to bring mom, we're going to bring dad, we're going to bring Aunt Sue on this trip. Talk to the doctor, talk about what makes sense, and other trusted advisors. Maybe there's a physical therapist that's been involved in your loved one's care. Maybe there's a psychiatrist that's been part of your loved one's care, or maybe it's your personal psychotherapist that you've talked to about this. Maybe your loved one is at a community like an Artist Senior Living. And this is something that Morgan will hear. I know that she's going to hear tons and tons and tons of questions. As soon as fall begins, should I take mom to Thanksgiving with the family? And this is a big one. And the people at Artists, if your loved one is there, or if your loved one is at another community, or if you're working with a home care agency, you want to get their opinion. How do you think he or she will do? What suggestions do you have when we're going to get on an airplane, or if we're going to do a really long car ride? So don't forget to consult with the doctor, other trusted advisors, people that know the situation and know your loved one. Another person or persons that you really should be consulting with, that very, very important, is your support group. If you are in a support group, feel free to write in yes or why in the chat section if you happen to belong to a caregiver support group. If you don't belong to a caregiver support group, I want to encourage you to seriously consider joining one. Now, why do I want to ask you to do that? You probably have a million things to do. You got tons on your plate. Maybe you have a job. Maybe you have minor children. Maybe you have kids in college. You have your housework. Maybe you have volunteer work, and you got your older loved one. Do I really need another commitment? Maybe you have your faith community. But the reason a support group is such a wonderful resource is because these are people that really don't have any intention other than just supporting you. They're there because they've been a caregiver. And there are caregiver support groups specifically for folks taking care of a loved one who has a memory impairment. And when you are in these groups, it's very interesting. I've led them. I've guest spoke at them many times. When you're there, the newbies learn a lot from people that have been in very similar situations. Or maybe you're not a newbie. Maybe you've been in a support group for a while and you're just in a brand new scenario that you've never experienced before. Like, okay, my daughter's graduating college in December. Should we bring dad to the college graduation ceremony? So talk to the people in your support group. What went well for them? What landmines did they deal with? What mistakes did they make that you can learn from? What went well? What would they have done differently if they traveled again and they brought the person that needed care? So that's another person or persons that really you should talk to. And if you don't have a support group and you want to participate in one, it's never been a better time. And because there's online support groups, now there's been online support groups for quite a while, but now there are so many virtual support groups. And I know that Morgan will be able to help you out, and you can contact her, you can speak with her, and she can let you know what the ones that are local to you in the Chicagoland area will be. So definitely, if you want to join one, look there. Preparing for the trip. So how do you prepare for the trip? Decide on your boundaries. So I have a friend who really, her mom had a lot of difficulty walking around, ambulating, we call it in healthcare. And she really never liked to use a wheelchair or a walker or a cane or anything like that. And so she was really slow. But the grandkids were going to Disney World and they wanted to invite mom to go, but they thought this is going to be really tough. This is going to be tough because these kids run around so fast. If you've ever taken a child to Disney, you know that it's going to be nonstop. It's going to be exhausting. And they said, listen, mom, and mom had a lot of health issues. And they talked about, well, if she's in the heat, but the boundary that they came up with is, mom, you can come on the trip. We want you to come on the trip, but you need to use a wheelchair because we don't want to slow down. We want to keep walking and keep moving. And if you go, I think that would really be the way that you'll be able to keep up with us. And so they, as a family, suggested that, and mom was okay with it. So that trip wound up working out all right, that it went fine because this family said, we're not going to get into an argument at the park. Everybody gets, I don't know about you, I travel a lot with my family and friends. I have actually, and you get on each other's nerves anyway, right? But when you have set some boundaries ahead of time, one in my family tends to be that, all right, if we're all sharing a house, we don't have to do everything together. If one person's going to the movies and another person's going out for pizza and another person's going to the beach, do whatever you want. It's your vacation. So, but I think it can be tougher when you have a loved one that has some kind of physical, cognitive, or mental health stuff happening, because they probably feel less control. So decide on what your boundaries are going to be. What are you going to do or not? Or maybe, you know what, mom, we're going to have one night during this vacation that, you're going to babysit the kids and you're going to stay with the kids for an hour while we go down to the lobby and have a drink together, your spouse and you, or something like that. Even though mom needs your care and needs your help, of course, if she's cognitively intact and all that. Boundaries are going to be different if somebody has Alzheimer's disease or another dementia like Lewy body or frontotemporal dementia. Some of the boundaries that you might decide on would be that that you're going to maybe have a home care aide come in the evening so you can go out after if your loved one's going to be tired at night. And that way you can still have the nightlife. You can still take the kids, or maybe you can do a date with your spouse or your partner. So think about if you do decide that you're going to travel with your loved one who has some caregiving needs, what are your boundaries going to be? Where is your line going to be? And that's very important in order for it to be a smooth trip. So the tip number 6 is you want to make sure you have plenty of extra supplies for your trip. Now that means everything. That means you make sure that you have a prescription, extra medications that your loved one takes, and phone numbers for all the doctors. You want to make sure that you have advance directives, a copy of advance directives when you're traveling. But also, especially, obviously, your person that you love, the older adult you love that you're helping care for, they're a grown-up, they're an adult. In Cruising Through Caregiving, I have a whole chapter about your older loved one is a grown-up, even if they have a lot of health issues or cognitive health issues. But you also probably can relate to this if you do have kids in your family, that you want to have extra snacks, you want to have extra water, you want to have activities for them to do. Maybe you're going to be bringing extra coloring books. Obviously, for the older loved one in your family, let's say that person, let's assume that this person does not have dementia. He or she, you want to remind them, hey, we're going to have downtime, or we're going to be on the airplane. Do we want to have headphones? Do we want to have books? But if your loved one has dementia, you really have to take ownership over the entertainment piece of it. Maybe adult coloring books, maybe putting together a calming playlist so you can play that in the hotel room or in the guest room where they're staying. Maybe making sure that you're loading up maybe an old movie that person really likes that they can watch in the car while you're traveling. So we want to remember that if you have a loved one that's cognitively intact, they're going to be able to take care of, okay, I love to read, I'm going to bring my books, I'm going to bring my knitting or what have you. But if your loved one does have a dementia, it's really going to be important for you to be thinking about what do they enjoy and what kind of activities can go on the road. What kind of activities will transfer nicely to the road? So number 7, research the local rules and triple check. So California today, we're seeing in some jurisdictions, they're telling people they have to wear masks again. So you want to be prepared with that sort of situation for if there's somewhere you're going where they might have different COVID rules than where you are living. But double checking, triple checking. Do you need to get tested before or after you go if you're leaving the country? I feel like it's constantly changing. And I'm hoping that this all calms down because I think we do need to learn to live with it. It's been a couple of years and we need to figure out a way that to manage this, but every jurisdiction still has different rules, different local attitudes about the way that they're managing the COVID risk. So you really want to make sure that you're up to date. Maybe one thing that can be really helpful is joining, if you are on social media, joining a Facebook group for the jurisdiction where you're going to travel to. So for example, I'm going to just throw this out. My husband and I are going to go to Key West with some friends in the fall. And I joined a Facebook group simply just to learn about different sites and areas of Key West and restaurants and things like that. But it also will be helpful if something changes in that jurisdiction about COVID rules or something like that. So that might be something helpful to do, but definitely be, or maybe subscribe to the local Chamber of Commerce, especially if that trip is in a month or a couple of months, just so you can keep up to date on if there's anything changes, or is it something that you're going to still be able to do that's going to make sense for you and for your loved one. But look at the local rules and look at the local guidelines, and but also in terms of what makes sense as far as, and I know I'm talking about the health guidelines and the COVID guidelines mostly, but look at what can you expect in that area. Obviously, everybody knows you want to look for weather and stuff like that. But in terms of if you want to make reservations, and especially if there's certain things that you feel like are going to be really important for your loved one to do or see in on the trip that you're taking. So making sure to look at the local rules. Tip number 8, who's going to provide the care ahead of time? You want to decide all that ahead of time. So one of the worst things that happens is on a trip, if you're bringing somebody that needs care, is, and maybe it's a bunch of you siblings, you're all going with mom, and maybe you're the primary caregiver, you do most of the work, and you're all going to a resort or you're all renting a house together. And when you get there, it looks like you're doing everything for mom still. And you're thinking, well, I got my brother and my sisters here with me. Why the heck are they not doing more? Shouldn't they be taking her for a walk in the morning? Shouldn't they be helping her with meals at mealtime, or making sure that she gets her medicine? I think it's a really important conversation for whoever is going on the trip to decide who's going to do what in order to provide care for the loved one. I think a lot of times if you go and the primary caregiver is there, and I'm guessing that some of you, and so just, you know, it's like in Cruising Through Caregiving, I talk about the concept of the primary caregiver is the captain of the ship. They're usually a spouse or an adult child who does most of the work, or really is the delegator, the organizer, and they often do a lot of the work. And then the secondary caregiver is, like, I call them the first mate. They're people that will do stuff directly for that loved one, but they're assigned typically by that captain, by the primary caregiver. And then tertiary caregivers, they might go grab maybe they make sure that the loved ones, their lawn is mowed or something, but they're not going to help out with personal care in the bathroom or something like that. And so it might be a shocker if you've got a bunch of siblings together and the primary caregiver's expecting one of the siblings to help mom in the shower, needs help in the shower. And they're thinking, well, me? So I think talking about it ahead of time is really, really important. Who's going to do what? And if other people in the family aren't going to help out, or don't want to, is it appropriate to bring in maybe some home care, home care aid, or even to travel with a home care aid? And I'm going to give you an example. When my grandmom died, she had a sister who lived in a nursing home, had a lot of health and mental health issues and cognitive health issues. And even though traveling in this case only meant going a half hour to the funeral, that was travel, and that was tough. She had a lot of issues. And so we actually hired a home care aide to accompany her and to take care of her during that service. And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, that's not really travel, 30 minutes. But in this case, this was a big deal. This is somebody that really didn't go out very much. But maybe it's appropriate to travel with an aide if somebody, or to hire a local aide, or calling ahead of time to the jurisdiction where you're going. And again, Morgan, I'm sure, is somebody that can give you ideas on where you can get somebody like that if you're taking a trip, or what organizations might be good ones to look into. But you want to have a fun, relaxing, nice time if you're traveling with others in your family, your friend network, and you're bringing your loved one. And when it's confusing, when people don't know if they should be helping or if they shouldn't be helping, sometimes if someone's not a primary caregiver, they feel like, oh, maybe my help isn't wanted. So that really can be helpful to discuss ahead of time. I'm wondering if there's anybody on this program this evening who is a secondary caregiver. If you're somebody that's a little bit of help, but you're not sort of the delegator, the captain of the ship, that sometimes you might feel like you're stepping on toes. And that is something that you really want to work out and talk about ahead of time. So how do we have a fun, safe trip? So tip number 9 is build in plenty of time, extra time. Now, I'm one of those people that if you're a certain type of person that procrastinates or likes to wait till the last minute, you probably would not like traveling with me. I like to get to the airport like way early. I just get very stressed out if I don't get to the airport way early. I want to be there. I want to be able to settle in. I want to make sure I don't have to worry about traffic. I don't have to worry about parking. And some people don't really do that. And I got to say that is something that will help you if you are a family caregiver traveling with your loved one. Bathroom stops. Your loved one might need to make a bathroom stop. They might need to maybe buy a book at the airport or something like that, because maybe they said, oh, I forgot to bring my book, even though we talked about having plenty of supplies on hand. When we build in plenty of extra time, there's time, if you're flying, for example, to talk to the flight attendant or the gate agent and mention that you're with somebody who has some care needs, and talk to them about what maybe there's extra space that you can. And right now it's kind of tough because the airlines are having some troubles, but maybe you can get a seat moved so you're getting a little bit more space. Maybe the middle seat would be open or something like that. But just so the folks, the flight attendant, the travel, the gate agent, that they're aware of what's going on. Building in plenty of extra time is always going to reduce anxiety. And remember, your loved one, if he or she has complex health, mental health, cognitive issues, any kind of change in routine is going to stress him or her out, especially if there's any sort of cognitive impairment. Feel free to write into the chat section if your loved one suffers with any cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body, any of those conditions. Please feel free to write in if a yes. This in particular is going to be it doesn't matter what condition that person has. If they don't travel much or they don't go out too much, it's going to be exhausting, and it's going to be a big jolt to that person's schedule. And so just having extra time for that person to adjust to, okay, we're now at the train station. Okay, we're now at the airport. Okay, we're at the family member's home where we're going to be staying for the next day. Building in plenty of time to get that person comfortable. Maybe they want to take a shower when they arrive right at the hotel or at the home where you're staying, and you have dinner plans. You want to make sure that you get there in time so they can take a nap, so they can rest and unwind. And I don't know if anybody else has had this happen to them, but I worked at home a lot during the COVID pandemic. I know many people did. And now when I'm traveling, I feel like it's almost taken a little bit more out of me because I'm just not used to it as much as I was. I was traveling constantly before March of 2020, constantly. But when you're not traveling all the time, when you're not out there all the time, it does take a little bit more out of you. Build in plenty of extra time so your loved one can sleep and get rest and be able to recharge their batteries in whatever way makes sense for them, whether it's downtime watching television or reading or taking a walk by themselves. If your loved one happens to be introverted, they probably need some time alone. And especially if they're around more people than usual, it's going to be really tough. Let me talk to you about introversion for a moment. Um, I'm introverted, and people find that very surprising because I speak professionally for a living. And what introversion means is that, and people tend to think of it as, oh, you're shy. And it's really more that you get energy by being by yourself. Like after you spend a lot of time with people, you need downtime alone to process and to build your energy back up. And if you happen to not be an introvert, I wonder if we have any introverts on this evening, but if you happen to not be an introvert, that probably just doesn't occur to you as much. But build in plenty of extra time. And now we're going to go to tip 10, the last tip. And this is one that is a little controversial. And a lot of people have said, what? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? But be willing to course correct. So something's going well. Say you take your loved one on a trip to the lake for a week and it goes beautifully. Your loved one, everyone's helping out and your loved one's getting the care he or she needs and everybody's having fun and it's relaxing and it's beautiful. Well, that's great if that's what's happening. But if it's not, I want you to consider how you're going to course correct to fix if the trip is not going well. And so I would say if you take your loved one to the lake house and they are miserable, it might be worth it to think about, should they go back home? Should you reschedule for another time? And a lot of people really hate hearing this because they say, well, that's not really fair. Well, no, it's really not. If you're really enjoying yourself and you're having a great time, but is it worth it? And you're the only one really that can answer that. Is it worth it to stay on the trip if your loved one is out of their routine, they're not adjusting, maybe they're wandering and they're getting lost, if they have dementia? Maybe it would make sense for them to go home. Maybe somebody can come get them. This is a very common issue with the holidays. So I'm going to give an example where it's a little bit simpler. This, and then constantly, and I know Morgan probably gets this all the time at the holidays. I know I do. Should I take my mom out of the senior living community to go to Hanukkah, to go to Christmas, to go to the New Year's party, to go to Thanksgiving? The answer is, it depends. There's a lot of different factors, and especially when there's a dementia diagnosis. But if you drive an hour and mom seems miserable, maybe it's a New Year's party, there's lots of flashing lights, there's a lot of noise, there's fireworks going off, there's a lot of people she doesn't know. It might be worth it to turn around and for her to go home, and maybe even for you to sacrifice that night and say, you know what, I'm not going to do that next time. I'm not going to take her to parties like that. It's a learning experience, and nobody does this perfectly. So I know that this is a little controversial and a lot of people resist this. Well, if we're going, we're going. But you still can course correct. You don't necessarily have to go home. Maybe it's not going great, but can we course correct? Maybe you're staying at a house with a lot of people and it's just too much for your loved one. Is there a way to get a hotel room so she can get a break? Is there a way to cut the trip a little bit shorter so she can get home to her own bed a little bit quicker than what she was expecting? But thinking about what can you do differently? Okay, we were going to see, let's say you go to Europe and you're going to see 10 sites in one day in Paris. Can you cut that down to 4 sites so your loved one is a little bit less tired? Maybe your loved one, and again, not if the loved one has dementia, but if your loved one has physical health conditions, maybe the way to course correct is for them to not participate in every excursion and every activity. But I think it's worth thinking about, is it worth it to continue the trip the way we're doing it? And this is a concept I talk a lot about in Cruising Through Caregiving, because in caregiving, a lot of times family caregivers will say, well, everything's going great today. Mom's at home. My husband's at home. We're taking good care of him. We're never going to move him. We're never going to bring help into the home. And I say, great. But it's always good to understand what resources are out there because at some point you probably will need to course correct. Alzheimer's disease is progressive. It probably, under normal circumstances, gets worse. And they're going to go into deeper stages of Alzheimer's disease. So it's definitely worth thinking about, well, if 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, things aren't going as well as they are today, what will I do to course correct and make caregiving a little bit simpler? So I want to just, again, if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to write in the chat section. But the big thing that I want to share is that all of us, all of you who are on today, if you're thinking about taking your loved one somewhere special or somewhere new, it's a beautiful idea. You want them to go see the great grandkids or the grandkids, or you want them to go on a beach trip, or you want them to go like that family caregiver I once worked with that wanted to take their spouse on an African safari. It's a beautiful idea. It's wonderful. Sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. So I just real quickly want to run through the 10 tips real quickly. Again, I want you to think about your risk tolerance. I want you to think about, why do you want to take the trip? And does your loved one really belong on that trip? Or should it be something you do by yourself? Consider if you need a break. Talk to the doctor, anybody else, trusted advisor, your counselors, your physical therapist, maybe your support group. Maybe if your loved one is at a senior living community like an artist, talk to the person in Morgan's position, or Morgan if they're at Morgan's Artists at Lakeview. Think about your boundaries. What are you not going to do? What is your line? What is everybody part of the family caregiving crew on this trip going to do? And what are they not going to do? Make sure you have plenty of supplies, snacks, entertainment, water, prescriptions, medical supplies that you might need, knowing where the local guidebooks, knowing where the local medical resources are. Research, especially with all the COVID stuff still happening, research the rules, make sure you know what's going on in the jurisdiction you're going to. Decide who's doing what ahead of time as much as possible. Build in lots of extra time. Don't do too much. You will end up miserable, and your loved one will surely end up miserable. And always be willing to course correct. So I want to thank everybody so much. And I want to encourage you, if you'd like a free chapter of the book, Cruising Through Caregiving, and all the worksheets, to go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. And I want to invite you, anybody, I'm going to hang on here for a little while. We have some time. If anyone would like to write in a comment or a question at all. And I'm going to ask for Courtney to just put in the chat section, cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. And if you would like to go there, you can get in the book, there are some, and these are all just downloadable. You'll get a chapter and all the worksheets. There's a worksheet in there for caregiver feelings to determine how your feelings are going. There's a worksheet that helps you to determine who in your friend, family, neighbor, faith community network can help you when you're overly stressed. There's a worksheet that determines if you're in martyr syndrome. There's a worksheet that can help you determine if you are in the right role as a family caregiver. So lots of great resources there. If anyone would like to write in a comment, a question, you're very, very welcome to do so. In the meantime, I don't know if Courtney wanted, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney. And if Morgan would like to say anything, we'll hang on for a little bit longer in case anybody has any comments or questions. But again, I do want to emphasize, if you have not been to Artists of Lakeview, it is spectacular. I've been there a couple times. Actually, no, I've been there once. And beautiful neighborhood, really terrific property, great care. And so feel free to make an appointment with Morgan and check out Artist Senior Living. They are a really lovely organization. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Courtney. Courtney is also going to put in the chat section an evaluation. If you would like to ask any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking on the program right now, but just also if you'd like to give us any feedback about how we did tonight, or if there's anything that you'd like to hear more about, you're very welcome to fill that out. You just cut and paste that into your web browser. So Courtney will put that into the chat section. And it looks like Morgan put her information in there, and her direct line is 317-965-3408. And you can see her email address is there. And Courtney, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And if you would put the evaluation in that chat section. So we'll be here for another moment or two. If people, if any, it's a shy group tonight, or maybe you don't have any comments or questions, but feel free to write in. We'll hang on for another moment or two, but I'm going to give Courtney the go ahead to wrap us up.
Sure. So I just dropped that link that Jennifer asked me to drop in the chat box. We would love your feedback. And I'd like to thank Artists again for sponsoring today's program for everyone. It was a great session. Stay tuned for the link after the program as well. You'll receive the survey that way as well. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.